Hello, everyone. We continue with our Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra series. We're now on verse 29. If we consider verses 24 through 27 to be describing all one practice, then now we're on the third practice of the text, the third yukti, or technique. So verse 29 is very interesting. And I will go ahead and paste it into the chat window for those of you watching live. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I will also paste this information into the About section, so you have it as well. So let's take a look at verse 29, first in Sanskrit. Udgacchantīṃ taḍit-rūpām prati-cakraṃ kramātkramam ūrdhvaṃ muṣṭi-trayaṃ yāvat tāvad ante mahodayaḥ. And this means, imagine the śakti rising like a streak of lightning from one subtle center to the next in succession. When she reaches the uppermost center, 3 fists above the crown, there comes the great dawn of liberation. You should see it in the chat window now. So this is such an interesting verse because this is one of our earliest articulations of what would come to be called kundalini. This notion of an energy rising from the base to the crown or above is, at the time of the composition of the VBT, a fairly new or very new teaching or concept for the tradition that would later, of course, become central in later tantric yoga and in hatha yoga as well. So let's look at the verse word by word. I think it's important to do for these practice verses especially. So we don't actually have a subject. We don't have the word Shakti in the verse. And so you might wonder, well, how do you know that that is the subject of the sentence? Well, the way Sanskrit works is if a verb is missing or a main subject noun is missing, then you assume whichever was the previous subject from the previous sentence, or in this case, the previous verse. Okay, so, well, we don't have, in grammatically speaking, we actually haven't had a subject for several verses now, but what we do get is a continuous repetition of adjectives and nominal forms in the feminine. So if we keep looking back, when was the last time we had an actual subject noun? What we find is the subject noun of prana shakti, or shakti rūpā. So since no other subject has appeared between then and now, we can assume that this is still the correct subject noun for this verse. So maybe that's a bit too pedantic, but just to give you a little insight into the translation process. Because with the word by word breakdown, people notice, oh, I don't actually see the word shakti, but he has it in the translation. But again, what you can't see, very easily unless you know the language, is that these adjectival words are all in the feminine. So this word udgacchantīṃ, rising up, is specifically in the feminine gender. So it's something feminine that's rising up. And again, the only possibility here in this context is shakti or prana shakti. Okay, so also, we don't have a verb in this verse. So again, we have to assume the most recent verb, which is in the previous verse, chintayet, which means one may imagine, or one should imagine, or one could imagine. So we can assume the same verb here. So that gives us the basic context. Imagine the Shakti doing what? Udgacchantīṃ, rising, like what? Taḍit-rūpā, like a streak of lightning, having the form or appearance of lightning. So rising like a streak of lightning. And does this Shakti rise all at once? No. we're told it actually rises prati-cakra, from one chakra to the next in sequence. That's the next phrase. Kramātkramam, in succession, in sequence. So the Shakti is said to be rising in sequence from one chakra to the next. So more about that in a minute. Then the verse says, when she, again, we're dealing with feminine pronouns and adjectives here, when she reaches the uppermost center, the highest chakra in this system of the VBT, that is the dwadashanta, which is above the head, about this high above the head. And it's measured either as 12 finger widths, so this is 4, so this is 8. I don't have a third hand, unlike the goddess, so I can't show you, but 12 finger widths, would be up there. In fact, in actual practice, it depends on the person, because your energy body can be a bit bigger or a bit smaller at different points in your practice, at different points in your life, from person to person. So, is your dwadashanta here or is it here? It's like if you're very attuned to your energy body and I come along and put my hand above your head, the point at which you feel that my hand is there intuitively, that would be the upper limit of your energy body as it exists now. But as a default location, it's these 12 finger widths, right? Or 3 fists. So then 1, 2, again, I don't have a third hand, 3 fists, that's the default location. So that's the point of using this phrase, muṣṭi-traya, 3 fists above the head. Okay, so when Shakti reaches this uppermost center above the head, the upper limit of your energy body, there comes, we're told, the mahodayaḥ, the great dawning, literally the great dawning, the great arising. So mahodayaḥ is a term that's used for spiritual liberation, for what Westerners tend to call something like enlightenment, but liberation or full awakeness would be more appropriate gloss of this phrase, mahodayaḥ, the great dawn, the great dawning. So yeah, we definitely see that used specifically to mean liberation. And now, let's see, have we covered everything in the verse? Yeah. So now the question arises of, well, what chakras are we talking about? Because as you guys know, if you've read my blog post, The Real Story on the Chakras, or you took the Chakras Illuminated course, I've been trying to get the word out there, and it is getting out there now, that the original tradition had not one, but many chakra systems. So, 5 chakra systems, 6, 7 chakra systems, 9 chakra systems, 12 chakra systems, and so on. And interestingly, the VBT has a 12 chakra system. Now, how do we know this? Well, because in the very next verse, again, the chakras are discussed. It's a different practice in verse 30, so we're not doing it today. But the chakras are discussed there, and the vowels of the Sanskrit alphabet are associated with the chakras. And we're told by the text that the 12 fertile vowels, so the 16 vowels minus the 4 infertile vowels, are to be associated with the chakras. We'll get into that more in the next video. The point is, we know from the next verse and its commentary that there are 12 chakras in this system because there's one vowel for each chakra, and we're told to use these specific 12 vowels. You see this in the diagram that I've posted already in the Tantric Yoga Now group. So you can check that out to see the location of these 12 chakras and the vowels associated with them and their names. Okay, so how does all this apply to our current verse, which again simply says that this Shakti rises from one chakra to the next like a streak of lightning? Well, this is one of those verses that can be read either prescriptively or descriptively. So prescriptive means it's telling you a practice. It's telling you to do something, to do a specific practice, okay? Imagine this. But it can also be read descriptively as a description of something that can happen spontaneously once Kundalini Shakti is awakened. This can occur spontaneously in meditation, even for people who've never heard of any of this, right? So let's take it prescriptively. What practice are we enjoined to do here then? Well, you can't really do the practice unless you have memorized, and not just conceptually, but you can sort of feel the locations of these 12 chakras. So the thing is, if you've worked exclusively with the 7 chakra system popular in the West, Muladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipura, Anahata, and so on, if that's the one you know, I would recommend to simply do the practice with the 7 chakra system that you intuitively are connected with, if you are, because it takes some homework, as it were, to kind of tune in and reorient yourself to a different chakra system, a 12 chakra system, okay? So either way, whether you're using this 12 chakra system here in the VBT, or the 7 chakra system, which is actually a later one, but perfectly valid, by the way. Some people misread my blog post to mean the 7 chakra system popular in the West is invalid. That's not true. It's perfectly valid. It's just not presented in anything like a traditional way in most yoga studios and websites. But anyway, what's the practice? Let's do it. It's a simple matter of, have you ever seen these sort of crystal ball things that they have at places like Sharper Image, and you touch your finger to the outside of the crystal ball and it makes the electricity from the center jump to where your finger is? That's sort of what we're talking about, because we are instructed to imagine the Shakti like a streak of lightning going, to the next chakra up. Now we know, streak of lightning is quite sudden and powerful, so from the base chakra, to the second chakra. And let me bring up the diagram here. Can I paste it into the chat window? Maybe I can. No, it won't let me do that. Give me just a moment here. And thank you, by the way, to our Tantric Yoga Now resident artist, Carmen Richards-Melton, for doing this diagram for us. Okay, so we don't actually get names for the chakras in this VBT system, but we can use the names that are used in the 7 chakra system for those that occupy the same location. So the first few chakras then are Muladhara at the pelvic floor, Swadhisthana at the mons pubis, which is basically just the top of the genitals. The Khanda, or the secret place, that is midway between the top of the genitals and the navel, and in the lower abdomen, and so on. And then some more that you know already, Manipura, Anahata, Vishuddha, and then some more that you don't know, like the palate chakra and the forehead chakra and the chakras above the head. Okay, so we're not going to get into a tremendous amount of detail on this because you can study the diagram. The main point is, let's just go over what it feels like to do the practice. So I'll just describe it first. You put your attention in the Muladhara, and let me interrupt myself and say, actually, that I do think this practice presupposes the other practices that we have had so far. I do not think it is very effective to do this out of the gate. I think if you've been working with the breath pause, Visarga meditation of verses 24 through 27, and you've been working with verse 28, radiant light shining up through the central channel, then this one might work for you. It might click. Because when a practice clicks, it feels very, very, very different from before it clicks. So that's kind of hard to describe in words, but you'll know it when it happens. Okay, so put your attention at the muladhara, at the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor, the perineum, or more specifically, the perineal body. Good to know your anatomy for this kind of thing. So it's this little mass of tissue at the pelvic floor called the perineal body. Okay, that's the muladhara, or that's the site of the energy center called the muladhara. And then, you know, directly above that, just a couple of inches, that would be the location of the swadhisthana. So when we say, like when I said earlier, mons pubis, that just means it's on that level, but it's actually inside the body more, directly above the perineum. So about a couple inches up, that's the swadhisthana, right? So how should you imagine the chakras? For this practice, in the simplest possible way, as spinning discs of light or spheres of light. But if you imagine a sphere spinning so fast that it kind of flattens into a disc, that is one traditional way to image the chakras that doesn't require you to image each one differently, which is way too much conceptual work for this practice. So please do not, in this practice, try to imagine a four-petaled lotus with the syllables, sham, sham, sam, hum, or whatever. Like, don't imagine all that detail and each chakra different. Rather, it's going to be much more effective practice, speaking from experience and transmission, if you just imagine all the chakras the same. They're all the same. They're just these spinning discs of golden light. Okay? If spinning feels too agitating or disorienting for you, don't imagine that. Imagine gently pulsing spheres of golden light. Okay? So it's really important that you tailor the practice to your constitution. Practice should never feel too difficult or too agitating. Okay? So gently pulsing spheres of golden light, and we're talking about, like an inch across type spheres, or inch and a bit. Okay, so then, and maybe you can, sort of give it an initial try. Again, putting your attention at the pelvic floor, feeling the pelvic floor, doing a gentle mula bandha if that helps you feel the pelvic floor. Make sure your jaw is relaxed, by the way, always. And then, if possible, sort of let it happen rather than deciding when it's going to happen. Just sort of wait for it. Wait for it, and at a certain moment, with no forethought, you just let the energy in that muladhara go bzz, upward, those 2 inches to the next sphere of light, the swadhisthana chakra. So if you're doing the practice, please keep your eyes closed and your attention interiorized. You don't need to see me for this. So now your attention is on the swadhisthana chakra. And so if a couple of inches, or maybe about 3 inches above that, is the khanda, this khanda center, which is below the navel, inside the lower abdomen. So at a certain moment, you let the energy bzz, upward as this little kind of arc, this like an arc of electricity into the khanda center. And then there's another chakra behind the navel, the manipura. And you let the energy arc upward at its own moment to that sphere or disk of light. And then there's another chakra in the heart, the energetic heart, not the physical heart, which is behind the sternum, directly behind the lower part of the sternum, is the anahata chakra. And at a certain moment, allow the electricity or the energy to arc upward from the navel center to the heart center. And it's okay if you don't feel anything, you're just imagining this, totally fine. And become aware there's another center in the throat center. And let the energy arc up from the heart to the throat. Become aware there's another center in the palate, at the top of the hard palate. Let the energy arc from the throat to that center. And another energy center behind the third eye, between the eyebrows, behind that point, the Agnya chakra. Let the energy arc from the top of the palate to there. And another slightly smaller center behind the middle of the forehead. And another center at the crown of the head, right at the crown. And another center a few inches above the crown. And the 12th and final center a few inches above that. And if you can now feel all 12 chakras simultaneously, feel that all 12 chakras are activated and gently pulsing with renewed life, vigor, energy, radiance. Feel they're all connected by this power. Om. Okay. So I ended up talking you through the 12 chakras of this Trika text, which I didn't know was going to happen. But again, it's really okay to do the practice with the 7 chakras that you know, if you are highly connected to that system. And if you're not, might as well learn the 12 chakra system. That's so either way is fine. The important thing is this practice. Now, how do we understand this practice? Just a little afterword here, because for most of you, all that's happening is you're just imagining. You're just imagining this happening. You're not feeling anything. You know, you might feel a little something here and there. You know, maybe when the energy went up to the crown, you might have felt a little tingle in the crown, something like that. You might have felt the tingle down below in genitals or the heart. But for most people, when they first start doing this practice anyway, it is just imagination. It's not really happening yet. So what's the point of that? There's all the point in the world. The whole tradition centers, the whole yogic aspect of the tradition very much centers on the notion that something imagined at first can become real and really real. So I don't have time to get into this in detail, but this is a very, very important and significant distinction between the way the West thinks about reality and the way the East thinks about reality, right? Because if you're coming from a consciousness only or a mind only view, then whatever you imagine vividly and repeatedly will actually become your direct real experience, your embodied experience, and manifest in your life, So it's a matter of entraining the power of imagination to focus consciousness in such a way as to reify what is imagined until it becomes non-conceptual direct experience, okay? So, in other words, when you're imagining the Shakti arcing from one chakra to the next, you are, as it were, drawing the blueprint for the house that you're going to build, to use a metaphor, okay? You need to get this blueprint super clear, and then it can happen for real. And you will know when that occurs because it's extremely palpable. And the energy takes on a life of its own. And you feel it palpably jumping from one center to the next in an undeniable fashion. Okay, so if you can doubt, if you're like, did I really feel that? You're probably just still imagining. You're just imagining more vividly. And when it happens for real, you can't doubt it. You're like, whoa, that happened. Okay, just to be clear. So unless you don't need to do any specific practice unless you're drawn to it, of course. The text itself says any one of these practices could be your main vehicle. But if you're drawn to this practice, then you keep doing it, you keep working it until you're feeling it happen for real. Okay, and then all the centers can really become highly activated. Sometimes a little bit overactivated, and you need to then tamp things down a bit. Okay, so that's maybe enough to say about this verse. We'll talk more about these 12 chakras in the next verse and the next practice, which is intoning the 12 vowels with these 12 chakras. And again, we are seeing here a progression. Later in the text, sometimes we get non sequiturs, where it's just like, whoa, okay, seems out of left field. But at this point in the text, we are in a progression. So I do encourage you to do this practice for the next week until the next video, at least, so that the next practice can click for you, because the next practice, again, works with these same 12 chakras, but installing and vibrating the vowel sounds of Sanskrit in those same chakras. Okay, any questions? Barbara asks, in what direction do the spinning discs spin if you're visualizing the chakras that way? Well, I can't say for sure. For me, they spin clockwise from a top-down perspective if I'm looking down on them, The main thing, though, is not to get too concerned about the visual element, that you're more feeling it, So if you should never, ever do a visualization exercise where you're imagining yourself on a screen, because you can't get the benefit of the practice if you're abstracting it like that. So when they say visualize, they never, ever mean put this image on a mental screen of yourself with these chakras. Don't do that. Just because it's useless. You need to actually be feeling them somatically. That's much more important than the visual element. Some people are more visual than others, Okay. Martin says, felt strong, discrete pulsing in most of the chakras, felt like water being swirled around a bowl, didn't get much visually. See, there you go. That's totally fine. It doesn't need to be visual. It's like the felt sense of these pulsing spheres or spinning discs is much more important. Alicia asks, does it need to move slowly from one to the next, or can it move swiftly? Is there value in slowing the process down? Well, it doesn't need to move slowly and it doesn't need to move swiftly. I would invite you to not be too directive in the practice and just to let the energy jump to the next chakra whenever it wants to. If it takes 5 minutes to do that, or if it takes 3 seconds to do that, So, maybe that means for some people you're sitting there for a while, I don't know. But the point is, when I guided it, that was just a practice run. You need to do it for yourself and let the energy jump to each next chakra, like at the moment the energy wants to, as much as possible. And again, if you're not really feeling it, but just imagining it, still there's an intuitive element that you can bring into play. And Alicia mentions that maybe for her it might be skipping over chakras and jumping straight to the crown. So that's fine, but just keep coming back down again and inviting it to bridge each gap. You see, we want it to bridge each gap between any two set of chakras. Catherine asks, I have difficulty with the idea of imagining the spinning disc. It doesn't need to be a disc. It's not important whether it's a pulsing sphere or a spinning disc. These are just ways of getting in touch with energy centers that actually exist within you, and it's a matter of whatever works. What way of imagining it works to help you get in touch with the energy centers? I've given just 2 traditional ways, and there's others, but those are important ones that I received also in oral transmission. Brigitte asks, is it the hard palate? Yeah, just above the hard palate, in the central channel, right? So soft palate's too far back. Natalia said it felt more like a dolphin spout than an electricity arc. Thank you very much for saying that, because this is important. It doesn't need to be. I was giving, one metaphor based on the verse saying it's like a streak of lightning. But it's important to be organic with these practices. You start from where the text directs you and then let it have its own life, its own character. If it feels like a dolphin spout from one chakra to the next, great. That's what Shakti wants to do. And Gerald asks, are these practices meant to not be willed into happening, but more of a surrender? Well, some of these practices, including this one, are kind of on a fine line in between, where there's a gentle will, an intention. You're using Icha Shakti for sure, but you're also letting it be organic and intuitive. So that's this aspect called Pratibha, the intuitive dimension. So Icha and Pratibha can go together. That seems counterintuitive for Westerners, that you're exerting a certain amount of will, but you're also open to the organic unfolding of that process. Okay, so we're over time, but I'll address this last question from Nihal. I'm more of a kinesthetic person and felt the energy moving slowly, but then faster from the heart to the throat. I felt discomfort when I got to the crown. Any suggestions on how to deal with this? Well, that's the wrong question, how to deal with this. You don't need to deal with it, you just need to be with it. I understand you've experienced discomfort in different centers over time. So if it gets very uncomfortable, then what you want to do is have a practice where you can redirect the energy, right? So if the energy is too intense in the crown, for example, then you might imagine it dissipating and opening out and not concentrated, right? It's important also to learn, there's a tantric version of this, but the easiest way to learn the microcosmic orbit is through Taoist websites, because the tantric version is not so much out there. but they're very similar. Taoism borrowed from Tantra quite a bit. And the microcosmic orbit involves circulating energy around or just bringing it down the front central channel. So if you have too much energy in the head, I'm just imagining this might be the case, because usually when people complain of too much energy, it's in the head or sometimes in the sexual center. But if it's in the head, you touch the tip of the tongue to the roof of your mouth, to the front of the hard palate, and you imagine that all that energy in your head spilling like a waterfall of light down the front of your body, down the front central channel, and then pooling in the lower abdomen, where you can hold more energy more comfortably. So that's a quick answer. But in general, yes, I understand. Sometimes if it's very uncomfortable, you want to do something about it, and that is totally fine. But in most cases, when people say, "How do I deal with this? What do I do about this?" Just be with it. Just be with your process. But yes, there are antidotes for more extreme situations. Yeah, and I said that was the last question. Catherine asks, from heart to throat is such a big leap compared to the other leaps. Any comment on this? Well, look at the diagram. Look at the diagram that we posted in the group. And you'll notice that the way the chakras are arranged does seem to highlight the heart center by creating a larger space between chakras both below and above the heart. That's just my intuitive answer. I don't know for sure. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. So very last thing, really, Nihal added that he usually feels this excess energy in the heart. Yeah, so intense pressure in the heart, like the heart is opening or breaking open maybe, or just pressure, intensity. So imagine, for whoever experiences this, as well as Nihal, opening the back door of the heart. Imagine the heart has a back door. You're opening it up, and you're letting that excess energy radiate out both front and back. And you're also doing the breath pause meditation. That's the first practice of this text, where you're exhaling the energy up and out the crown of the head. So do both of those things to relieve that heart pressure. Okay, so we'll continue at the rate of one verse per video. As you can see, that one verse can take a while to unpack. Om.